With an object-oriented programming language, you can build incredibly complex applications. And when you're doing that, it can really get overwhelming because you have all this memory that you're accessing at different places. And this is one of the really cool things about accessibility keywords. When you use another kind of Java tutorial, you'll often see everything just being a public keyword. And we're going to show you right now how using these different levels of access modifying keywords can help you make your code much easier to read, much easier to use, and basically protect you from writing bugs. So let's talk a little bit about scope and what that really means before we jump directly into what these keywords are that we're going to show you. Here I've already started an application and I've had the debugger stop on line 25. And I want you to take a look at what is down here. This is the actual activity that we're in, and you can see that there's this myJoke equals null, and this is basically what is currently in scope. You notice that we're not seeing more than 4 variables. Even though there are tons of things that are allocated right now in memory, we can only see 4 from here. This is really going to help us focus on what we need to do in this particular class and this particular object at this time. And the way this works is myJoke equals null is because if you look up here, we have a myJoke variable equal null, and when we're in this method inside of object activity, we have access to myJoke. Notice right now we don't see any J. That's because this line has not run yet. But if I step over, you can see now that J has suddenly appeared in my variables list right down here. Now inside of J, we can even see what that particular object consists of, which is a joke punchline and joke setup variable, and sure enough, they are the strings that we passed in. So right now we could say that J is in scope. Now, the problem with this is that when we go through all of our code and eventually end up here at the very end of this method, anything that is just a normal variable like this, something that is basically just defined right then and there in the method call, it's going to go away. It's going to go off the stack, as it's called. So this becomes a problem for us. Like, well, what if I still want to reference that piece of memory outside of this method call? Well, that's why you actually want to put some, and not all, just some important pieces of memory defined with the actual class, like this private joke myJoke is. The reason why that's great is because now if we come down here to this other method, and I'm just going to run until I get to that method, you'll see that I no longer have access down here to J, but I do have access to myJoke. So the entire point of actually saving that particular reference with a member variable allows it to stay in scope with this particular class and object. Now, your first question might be, well, why don't I just have everything be one of those particular types of member variables? What is the difference between having something just temporary on the stack and actually saving on the heap, which is what you do here when you make it a member variable? And there's 2 answers to that. One is it makes it much easier on yourself if you're not inundated here with the entire memory stack, right? You want to focus on just what you're doing at that moment. And if you're using something temporarily, there's no reason to save a reference for it. We want it to be garbage collected and go away and make room for other things that we want to do. So you really just want to use these member variables when you're actually having state that needs to be saved with that particular object. Another way that we can manipulate what we're allowed to do in C is by accessibility keywords. And for that, I'm going to show you a diagram. So far we've already seen these keywords before. We've seen this word public, and we might have already come across private, and you might have even seen the word protected. Well, each of these keywords is basically allowing you to describe what other classes and objects have access at any one time to do something. We really want to always create our code where we start with the least amount of access and slowly open up access as it's necessary. Again, a lot of other Java courses are going to suggest that you should make everything public, and I'm going to show you why not doing that is going to make your life so much easier. So let's just first go over what the different ones are. So we have basically public, protected, and private. You can also see here that if we don't specify any of those things, we kind of get a default setup. And as you can see here from private, right, as we go from private upward to public, start to get access to seeing and accessing and changing those particular objects in memory. So let's take a look at what these particular access members mean. Well, public means basically anybody can use that particular method or member variable. You really want to use it for things that are not going to be a big deal if somebody suddenly runs that method or changes that object or member variable on the fly. The next level up, or I should say next level down from public, is protected. You want to use this when your objects have a pretty close relationship. For instance, if you're extending a class, which we'll get into in a little bit, or you're basically wanting it to be a class that works very closely with another class, you can see that the protected keyword here means that this first class actually has access to him. Partly that's because he extends the first class, but also it's because he's probably a part of the same family or package. Now, private, if you notice here, nobody has access to anybody's private members. This one doesn't even have a private member at this point. But everybody gets access to the public ones. So let me show you actually in code why this is useful and why you should care. If we were going to go into our joke class, and I'm going to run the debugger to the point where the joke class gets used. Okay, so on this line, I'm actually going to dive into the constructor for this particular joke by pressing play. You can see here that we have public joke setup and public joke punchline. Yes, those things get set up. And what this means is outside here, if I want to, I can actually just say j dot joke punchline, joke setup. These are public variables that I can actually set to be different things right now. Well, this isn't so good, because what's going to end up happening is if I want to use my own object, j, I'm going to see all of these different things. I don't know now whether or not am I supposed to use set joke punchline or joke punchline, or it's just a lot of confusing member variables and method calls, and it's just overwhelming to actually try to figure out how am I supposed to use my own code. Watch this small change and look at how much easier it is for me to decide what to do with my own code. I'm going to go into the joke class, and rather than having these things public, I'm going to make them private. Why? Well, when I'm first creating a joke, I'm defining what the joke setup and joke punchline are. And I don't want other people to suddenly change that stuff on the fly. This particular joke class, it is concerned with the actual changing of those jokes. Instead of having these particular member variables public, if I make them private, what I can do is create two methods that set and get that particular member variable. Okay, well, this still may seem a little confusing as to why would I want to do that. Well, here's one reason. Now, if I actually try to change that j, it's much more clear to me about what I'm allowed to do. In fact, you'll see this particular type of method call all the time, get and set. We call them getters and setters. So when we get and set something this way, rather than changing it underneath, we're protecting ourselves with accessibility keywords, and it allows us to do something like this. I can now go into joke, and every time somebody, for instance, wants to set a new joke setup, I can do something like this. Joke setup equals joke setup, and then I'm going to add in a little bit beforehand. Here's my favorite joke. And then that gets set. Now, what has happened is every single time someone sets up a joke, I have overridden that functionality to do this every single time. This is so much easier if you have a particular setter and getter for methods, because rather than trying to find every single time that I ever said joke setup equals something and replacing it with, oh, okay, find that and then add this particular piece to it, I've just overridden the functionality for everything. This kind of encapsulation of functionality is amazing because it allows you to go through your code and make little changes that you know will be encapsulated with the functionality that it needs to be with, and not have to try to find every single reference where now you want to make a change. This particular type of thinking about keeping everything separated and concerned with exactly what it's supposed to do for that particular class is going to allow you to write really powerful reusable code. So as you move from being a beginner and understanding how Java works to actually writing Java code, I want you to try to take great care to always start with your accessibility keywords being private, and then slowly move them from private to protected, and then finally public when and only when you actually need other classes to see those things. Managing scope this way is going to make your life a whole lot easier.